Okay, here we go. Today is all about carbohydrates. So my daughter lives in Canada. She's up in Vancouver Island, which is about 3,000 miles away. And we try our best to keep our relationship pretty tight. And my granddaughter's up there too, so I try at least once a week to make contact with her and more than that. But she's on this kick now where she wants to do educational videos with me. So I'm cool, whatever it takes to make connections with her, I don't care. So the last video was on, Brennan. It was on vulnerability. So she sent me this on vulnerability, and it was an Oprah Winfrey thing. I was like, I'm not a big Oprah person. But anyway, so I did it with her. We had a great discussion. It was excellent. And so this week is my turn to pick. So I was looking at things, and I picked something about the church and how the church is changing, because she's in a very conservative church, and she's having troubles because she's kind of more liberal. So there's a lot of constraints with her in the church. So she's struggling with the rules of the church a little bit. And I wanted to have some more conversation. So I pull up a TED Talk, and that's what my Devo is going to be about today. And the TED Talk is about the church. So I'm going to ask you the question, what is the church? What is the church to you? And please help me out, and someone help me with my Devo today. Yes?
It's the people that attend church together.
Exactly. So the TED Talk today was about the church and what the church was, or what the church is. So his illustration of the church, this is the illustration he had. It was a cartoon. It was a cartoon Jesus, and he had a little church like this, and he was placing it down in front of the Christmas tree. So, and his point for his illustration was that the church, then Jesus and God asked, Jesus, what are you doing? I see you placed a present down there. And he says, yes, but I'm having a hard time getting it out of the box. So that was Jesus' comment, meaning that the church is kind of in this box right now. And so his point was, what he was talking about is that we seem to think of the church as maybe this kind of building thing, okay? And what the church has become lately, his point was, it's very institutionalized. So basically we have a corporation. The church is a corporation, and it's run like a business now. And there's some truth to that. I mean, because, there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, pastors have to fill seats to pay the bills and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of corporation built into it. So his point was the church is exactly what you said. It's the people. That's it. It's flat out. So when you go to church, where do you go? When you go to church, where do you go? With people. That's it. You go to church where a couple people gather and talk about Christ. That is the church. That is it. And his point is that massive amounts of people are leaving the church, especially the younger generation, the millennials. You guys, and even the generation, even my generation is leaving the church because we're getting tired of corporate church. We're interested in more in the personal relationship with other people and the development of our spirituality. When you go to church now, it's not that much different than you coming here and sitting in class, because the pastor gets up and speaks to you and educates you and tells you what to do. But if you look at the church back, like I'm in Acts right now. I mean, they would gather at houses and they would sit down, and the idea of church was everybody talks and everybody had input. It wasn't one main person getting up and speaking to the group. It was everybody interacting. Church. So I thought, wow, this is going to be a great talk with my daughter, because this is going to fit into kind of what she's thinking too, and some of her liberal ideas. I don't mean liberal in a bad way. It's just a little outside the conservative box. So the Free Methodist Church is a very conservative organization, and I'm kind of a little conservative, but I'm also open to new ideas too. But I do like this idea of church, and this is what we're evolving to. This is really the evolution of what we're going to do. And the conservative people who are in this corporate model of church, they're scared. They're scared of this change, because it's going to be the death of how we know church to be. But the people who are interested in this relationship and spiritual development, they're excited, because now there's going to be, church is going to be everywhere. It's going to be a yoga class. It's going to be at a cafe. It's going to be wherever. Church isn't 1 hour a week. Church is all the time now, which it should be, right? All the time. Yeah, constantly talking. So, topic on Friday, we talk every Friday, is going to be, we're going to talk about this TED Talk. So I'm very excited. I'll let you know how things turn out. I'm sure she'll love it because she's kind of in this mindset. But so think about that as maybe digest that a little bit today. Just that, you've heard it, be the church. Well, you are the church. So and wherever you're going to be vulnerable and talk about God and talk about Jesus is bringing church to life. So please do that. Say a quick prayer. We'll get started. Our Father in heaven, we bow our head and we give thanks for this day. We give thanks for the church. We give thanks for the church that is in four walls. And we're thankful for the church that is outside the four walls. We're thankful for church and understanding that church is and are the people. So thank you for all that. Thank you for the opportunity to grow in you. Thank you for our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ coming back to teach us, to be our rabbi, our teacher, our Savior, and show us how to become how to understand the kingdom of God, which is in us and it's all around us. Please help us to think about these things, gather up these ideas, and please just bless all of us with these concepts and ideas. And Heavenly Father, I ask that everybody that's in this room, we all have a little something on our hearts that may be working on us, and please bless each one of us with whatever we may need to try to help us to get through this, to understand it, to heal from it, just whatever we need. Just please bless us. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Okay. Moving on to carbohydrates today. So, turn in worksheets? Is that a turn in? Okay. Is there any other turns?
You just check some of the things that.
That's okay, we'll figure it out. So I think I have the system. I printed up this lovely little thing here, so now when people turn it, I can just check it off, and that'll help me keep organized, I think. So. All right, so here we go, carbohydrates. That didn't work. Okay, so carbohydrates are an energy source for the body. We all know this, we read about it, you turn in your worksheets, you kind of wrap your mind around carbohydrates now a little bit. It's the best energy source, so I want to talk about that a little bit, and I want to talk about these things that are the diets we're going to be exploring. Has anybody heard of the keto diet? Okay, and what is the keto diet uses as the main energy source? Fats, okay. And then we have the Atkins diet, and what is that as the primary energy source? Does anybody know that? Meat. Okay. Protein, fats, carbohydrates, that's what we're going to be talking about. Okay, so today, what you're going to learn today is the body's primary, its number one go-to for energy is carbohydrates, okay? That's how the biochemistry of our body is designed, all right? So, I always go back, and in my practice, make sure I'm on camera, in my practice, what I do is the more I treat patients, and the more you're going to find this too, the more you treat patients, you just have to go back to why did God do this? So why is the calcaneus, the heel, so big? It's this big bone down there, and then the little bones in the beginning of the foot or in the forefoot are smaller bones. Are we supposed to run on our toes our whole life, or are we supposed to land on our heels? Well, we're supposed to land on our heels when we walk and we run, okay, except for sprinting. And then I don't want to get on a tangent, but anyway, so there's purpose to everything that's in the human body. So why is there a clavicle? Well, the clavicle helps us so we can push things away from us and throw things. It works as a strut. Why is the nose pointed down? Can anyone answer that for me? Why is the nose pointed in a downward direction like this? Is there a purpose for that? Oh, okay, when it rains. You're on the right track. That's not the only thing. But why is their nose pointed down?
To protect us?
It is to protect us. How? So when it drains out, so when you're laying on a massage table and your face is in the hole, everything would just drain out like that. No, it does. The gravity can work that way. But okay, think of another reason. Why is our nose pointed down? This is a hard one. So when we jump into the water, we don't drown. When we jump into the water, what happens is a little bubble forms here, and it creates this kind of this barrier so water can't go up our nose and we drown when we jump in water. Are we aquatic animals? Yes, we are. Where are most of the large cities, where are they positioned? Around water, right? We need water, super important. So when a dog jumps in the water, what does it do? It gets its head up like this. Why does it do that? So it doesn't drown, because its nostrils go right into its lungs, and it'll drown. If it jumps in, it'll fill with water. So guess what? When they run, it's a lot more efficient, because air can go right into their nose, right into their lungs. When we run, it doesn't work that way. So sometimes when you see sprinters and they start to go back like this with their nose, they're trying to decrease resistance so they can get oxygen into their lungs. Is this a fun tangent we're on right now? So there's a reason why the body, God put things on the human body, okay? So if you start to look at everything, there's a purpose, and it's kind of a neat purpose, okay? So if we look at the energy systems in the body, carbohydrates is the number one. It's the number one fuel that's used. So if we go into all these diets where we decide to use all the other things, the fats and proteins, is that really how the human body works? It's not the primary way the human body works. So now we're up in Alaska or up in Antarctica, and we don't have any fruits and vegetables because it's in the middle of winter, right? Everything's frozen. We don't have access to anything, right? That's where we're living now, so put yourself there. You're in your little igloo, and you're going outside, and you gotta find some food. Well, there's mostly animals that you can kill, right? So most of the winter, you may eat seal. So the human body can then use fats and proteins to sustain itself. But is its number one, is it the number one fuel to use? No. But we can use a lot of different fuels and we can still live. But the number one fuel is not gasoline, it is carbohydrates. Okay. So carbohydrates, minimal amount of disease processes that are linked to it. So if we look at, high protein diets are linked to a lot of disease processes. In this country, in the United States, do we have high protein diets? Incredibly high protein diets. Standard American diet is typically we eat double the protein we need in this country, double, okay? So is that directly linked to disease? There's a lot of research that says yes. Okay. Do we eat a lot of the fiber we need? So the standard American eats less fiber than is needed throughout the diet. Yes?
Was the meat thing is a big part of that, the fact that a lot of what we're eating is red meat?
No.
No?
Nope, it really isn't. The protein, protein has a lot of fat in it. Actually, even chicken, even turkey is supposed to be low in fat. They have, there's some, it depends on what type of meat you're taking from the bird, has the same as red meat. So nope, they've, Dr. Campbell out of Cornell University shows that increased protein actually is directly related to increased disease process. There's a direct link between the two. So, and it's just overconsumption of anything leads to disease, right? I mean, we overconsume alcohol, what happens? Not good things. Okay. We got to get through 30 slides, so I got to not talk so much. So we're going to try to do this. So, carbohydrates are a little bit less expensive. So if you go into the meat section and you go buy some lobster, that's kind of pricey. If you go buy some, ribeyes, which I used to love, and they still are tasty. I just don't eat them anymore. They're expensive. So I go buy an apple, and it's not as expensive. So everyone thinks that if you eat a good diet and you go to the produce section and you buy all fruits and vegetables, it's expensive. I can't afford that. Well, by the time you take all your processed food out of it and you take most of your meats out of it, you're actually saving money by eating fruits and vegetables. It's kind of what it boils down to. And you'll find, when you guys do the nutrition feast, you'll kind of see that. As you go through and purchase stuff, you'll keep track of that and you'll see. Okay, carbohydrates are typically high in vitamins, minerals, nutrients. They're nutrient-dense food, good stuff. High in fiber. Remember I talked about if you focused on eating a high fiber diet and a low fat diet, I guarantee you will be healthy. You'll be very healthy. Because high fiber foods, what are high fiber foods? It's it, fruits and vegetables. It's great brain fuel. It's the primary fuel source for the brain, carbohydrates. less fattening than fat. I think that's self-explanatory. And there are things called good carbs. The good carbs are what you find in your produce section. And then there's carbohydrates that are processed. And those contain a lot of other chemicals and sodium and sugars and all kinds of stuff that aren't the good carbs. So, carbohydrate, 1 gram is 4 calories. 1 teaspoon is 16 calories. And 1 pound is 186 calories. So what are the different types of carbohydrates? We have the mono, we have the di and poly. So that's what we're going to go into, and I think on, let's see here, go to the page written down where we're going to turn to. Actually, we're going to go into it the next page. So let's turn to page figure 4.1 on 127, and you probably have already looked at this already. So in figure 4.1, that is actually the chemical, or yes, the organic chemical structure of carbohydrates. So I think that's just good, just to see the formation. You know, chemistry, I'm sure you all love chemistry, and that's why, you know, everybody's in medicine, is because we're so good in our sciences. So, but when you combine different sugars, they create sugars. Bless you. So lactose is glucose and galactose, okay? So who's ever heard of lactose before? And what is lactose in?
Dairy.
Dairy, okay. And what about sucrose? Has anyone heard of sucrose? Okay, and what products have sucrose in them? What's that?
Table sugar.
Table sugar? Yes, actually table sugar can have that, sure. Anything else, like products? What products have sucrose in them? What's that? Yeah, I mean, fruit can be in that. Just think more processed stuff. What kind of processed foods would have sucrose? Because this commonly you add sucrose. This is what Food Incorporated does to food products, is to add sugar into it. So sucrose would be one. What would be one?
Syrup.
Yeah, corn syrup. Juices, fruit juices. Oh, I thought you were raising your hand, son. You know, like pancakes, dark chocolate, commercial cereals are a big one. Deep fried meats, sweet sauces, cookies, milkshakes, a lot of stuff is added sugar, okay? Again, if you try to go on a diet, a no sugar diet, and you try to find products that don't have added sugar, it's really hard. Any of the processed foods, you're gonna have a hard time finding it where there's not added sugar. What about maltose? Has anyone heard of that before? Yeah, that you're gonna find that in crackers and breakfast cereals and all kinds of stuff. So, and they even put that in tater tots, and you'll just see all this sugar that's added to all kinds of stuff. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theory guy all the time, but there's a lot of we are manipulated in a lot of different ways, and I want you guys to become aware of how this happens and what to look at as far as your labels and things like that. Okay, so next we're moving into, that's me when I was 22. So now we're starches. So starches are glucose that are for plants, and plants store up this starch product, okay? But we store like plants store starch or make starch and store it. We store carbohydrates also, and we store them in our muscles. We store them in our liver, and that is glycogen. So basically your carbohydrates break down and then are stored as glycogen in the muscles and in the liver. And that's how, when we utilize the carbohydrate system for energy, that's the first thing that happens. So you go out to exercise, and your muscles then release glycogen, which then give you energy to do the exercise. And when that runs dry, then your liver kicks in. And then when your liver runs dry, then guess what happens? you hit the wall. Has anyone heard of hitting the wall? Where you just can't hardly move anymore, like when marathon runners go out or athletes go out and hit the wall and they can't move anymore. It's just they're exhausted. A lot of times their glycogen stores are completely expended. And if they try to do anaerobic activity, it's almost impossible. It's like weightlifters when they lift and they can't even do a bicep curl anymore because it's so exhausted. That's one kind of example. Okay, so how much carbohydrate do we need? The very minimum is 130 grams, okay? So how many calories is that in a day? So if the minimum's 130 grams, how many calories is that? Go ahead and figure it out. And just scream your answer out. Yes, it is. All you do is you multiply it times 4. So in a 2,000 calorie diet, the minimum you need to maintain health, as by the recommended daily allowance, is 520, which is not much. That's really minimal, but that's the minimal what we need. So the acceptable micronutrient distribution range is about 45 to 65 of our calorie intake should be carbohydrates, okay? And the daily value is 60%. So it's about 300 grams on a 2,000 calorie diet. And 25 grams of fiber, actually, it's between 25 and 38 is what's recommended per day for us. So when we are doing chronometer, this tracks everything for you. Everything. So then you'll know if your fiber intake is good, you'll know your mineral, everything. So let's talk about fiber for a minute. So we have 2 kinds of fiber. So let's look at an apple. On the outside of the apple, we have the skin of the apple. And what kind of fiber is that? Insoluble. And then on the inside of the apple, we have fiber in that too, and that is soluble. So the soluble kind of binds the apple together, and the outside is the protectant. But we need both of those, and we utilize both of those. So the insoluble fiber has the greatest effect on fecal bulk. Does everybody know what that is? I hope everybody knows what that is. Okay, good. So it creates rapid movement through the digestive tract, and why is that important? Because the fiber moves a lot of toxins and excess hormone and mucus, and it just moves things through the system, so they just don't sit there forever, okay? Because when they sit there, bacteria can grow, and we can get all kinds of toxins that develop from that, which can make us sick. Has anyone heard of prebiotic before? Does everybody know what that is, prebiotic? No? Okay, let's go into that. So basically, the fiber, the prebiotic fiber, is this insoluble fiber, and it goes through the system. And it actually starts in the small intestines, and it starts to ferment when it reaches the large intestines. And this fermentation process leads to beneficial bacteria colonies within the large intestines. Okay? And this is actually an increase in the desirable bacteria. So this insoluble fiber then creates this bacteria in the large intestines that is the productive bacteria that we need. So what's the difference between prebiotic fiber and probiotics? Has anybody heard of probiotics before? Yeah, okay. So that is actually where you put beneficial bacteria in your system. So when you eat yogurt and things like that. So that's actually putting bacteria in your system. And the prebiotic is when you put the insoluble fiber, and when it ferments, it creates bacteria, the good bacteria in your intestines. All right? So next, let's see. So fiber-rich in food have low glycemic index, are low glycemic index foods. So they're low in sugar. So they increase insulin sensitivity. So what does all that mean? So the glycemic index is just simply a system that ranks food on a scale from 1 to 100, okay, based on the effects on blood sugar. So when you digest food, what does that do to your blood sugar? What does it do to the glucose in your sugar? Does it make it skyrocket? Does it make it come down? And so this index just puts numbers to different foods to show what it does to that glucose level in the bloodstream. Okay, so insulin, everybody knows what insulin is, right? What produces insulin? So it regulates the amount of glucose in the blood. So when the blood glucose goes way up, what does the pancreas do? It produces insulin. So what does the insulin do then? So we got this insulin, and now we have high blood sugar, so what happens then? So you're saying it normalizes it by decreasing it? Or how does it do that? Does anybody know the mechanism for that? That's exactly right. Good job. So yes, so insulin stimulates something, it's the GLUT4 receptors on cell membranes, and which then increases that number and then allows for the glucose to come into the cell. We'll get to that in a minute. Don't get hung up on that. So insulin sensitivity is just basically how your body can react to insulin to allow glucose in the body. So when you have insulin sensitivity, normally that's a good thing, and your body can react well, and exercise helps to improve the sensitivity to allow the glucose to enter the cells. And there's some foods that do the same thing. Okay? So functional fiber. Has anyone heard of functional fiber before? Does anybody know what functional fiber is? It's kind of, we'll just refer to it as man-made fiber to help you move bulk through your intestines. Okay, so it's kind of a man-made product. It does the same thing. It does the same thing as fiber that we eat in our diet. But sometimes we might need more of it due to constipation or whatever, and we just can't eat enough. Can't eat enough fruits and vegetables to allow it to happen for whatever reason, or the person just doesn't do that. Okay. So this is an example of the daily food intake. This is from table 4.3 on page 129. It just kind of shows foods and grams of fiber that are associated with the food. So what we want to do is, again, we want to hit that 30 mark. We want to hit 30 grams per day. So this just is a way to just kind of see that throughout the day. I mean, if you're eating a little bit more of a plant-based diet, it's pretty easy to hit your fiber intake. Super easy. Okay. And what foods don't have fiber? Meat. Meats don't have a lot of fiber. So if you're a heavy meat eater, and if you eat a lot of starchy foods, not a lot of fiber in that. So what's the standard American diet consist of? Quite a bit of meats and starches and things like that. And fats. Fats don't have any fiber. So carbohydrate intolerance. Has anyone heard of lactose intolerant? Okay. So that just means you have low levels of lactase, and lactase is a chemical that helps to break down lactose. So the symptoms, you're going to have a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms, and just bloating and maybe bloating, flagellation, all that kind of stuff. So how can you, if you can't take milk products, what other things can you do to provide calcium to your body? So we have different dairy products you can use. There's dark green vegetables are a great source of calcium. So if you're on that plant-based diet, or if you increase fruits and vegetables, you're going to get all the calcium you need. So yeah.
Is that why people are drinking like the greens that you mix into water now to say it like helps their bloating and stuff? Is that kind of the same?
I'm not sure exactly what product that is you're talking about.
It's just like they call it like greens, and it's like
oh
powder.
So it's almost like they take your vegetables and they just kind of dehydrate them and they make them to a powder, and it's like So I think what that product's designed to do is to increase your vegetable intake throughout the day. We'd have to kind of look at the labels and stuff to see what that is. I don't think it's designed mostly to increase like calcium or anything. It's just to increase your vegetable intake. And again, when you deal with processed things, it's just not as good as Mother Earth's vegetables and fruits that come in that are in the produce section. So question for you. Oh, go.
Is it possible that your body can produce more lactase like as you get older? Like, because like when I was younger, I couldn't like drink milk and stuff because it would like give me stomach aches and stuff.
Right.
But like now I handle it fine. And
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, you hear a lot of infants that have all these milk allergies when they're younger, and then they just kind of grow out of them as they grow older. I know that every 7 years the biochemistry of your body changes. So, like if you're using deodorant and all of a sudden you're using the same deodorant for multiple years, and all of a sudden the deodorant stops working, it's like, this isn't working anymore. Again, it goes into the biochemistry of your body constantly changing, so that every 7 years it changes. So yeah, I think you can grow out of certain sensitivities. Yeah. And then also, if you increase your immune system too, I think that really will help you change those sensitivities too. So who drinks the most amount of milk in the world? What country? We do, right? We do. So who has the highest incidence of osteoporosis in the world? We do. So if we drink milk, are we gonna have strong bones? I don't know. I mean, that doesn't really lead to, there's not a lot of good results there. High milk, strong bones. There's not a correlation between the two. So actually with an acidic diet, which is high in protein and really sometimes, well, for instance, like milk, when you drink low-fat milk, it has higher acidity. So when your body becomes more acidic, there has to be something to buffer the acidity from what we take in, okay? So what is the number one buffer in the human body to acidity? Calcium. And what releases calcium to balance the pH in the bloodstream? The bones. So, isn't that interesting? Okay, so then we have something called celiac disease. Is anyone familiar with that? Yeah, okay. So there's a bunch of symptoms of celiac disease. Diarrhea, gastrointestinal symptoms, stomach pain, deficiencies in B12 and iron, tiredness, weight loss, hair loss, skin rash, tooth enamel problems, osteoporosis, depression, infertility, and joint or bone pain. So how do you diagnose celiac disease? Anybody know? What's that? Yes. Actually, you take a sampling of the intestinal wall, the small intestinal wall, and you can find out that if you have it. Also, also symptoms too. So symptoms along with procedure of the biopsy of the small intestine. So good. So does anybody know who has someone who has gluten sensitivity? Not a gluten, there's a difference between a gluten allergy and a sensitivity. So an allergy is basically, a gluten allergy kind of puts you into the celiac diagnosis, okay? But a lot of people have gluten sensitivities. Do you know anybody that does? Raise your hands if you do. Okay. How do you diagnose gluten sensitivity?
Like cutting it out of your diet for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, like the fat, like if you cut it out, like I can see that.
Yeah, so it's really trial and error. It's guessing. It's just trying this and trying that. So people come in and out and say that they have gluten sensitivities. How do you know? It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I've cut gluten out a little bit and I feel better. Okay. So it's really vague. It's really vague. So what Food Incorporated has done is they've really jumped onto the gluten sensitivity thing. So gluten-free this. Cheerios, gluten-free. Well, Cheerios has been gluten-free forever. Fresh green beans, gluten-free. Well, you know what? Duh. There's no gluten in green beans. But do you see that what's happened now is the Food Incorporated has then latched onto this gluten thing and now using it as a marketing tool. But my beef with it is the consumer. How do you know you have a gluten allergy? So there's blood testing you can do for gluten allergy. I did it. It's expensive, but you can find out what sensitivities you have through blood testing, which is a lot more scientific. I'm not saying that you can't just eliminate it and feel better. That's a good way to do it. It is kind of vague still. It's a little bit vague. It's just like saying, I think I'm deficient in D vitamins. Let me take some and see how I feel. I feel a little bit better. I I mean, that's okay to do it that way, it's just not very scientific, so. Okay. So, recommended added sugars in the diet, okay. So, let's see, recommended for added sugars. What do I have down here for notes? Okay. So, in a 2,000 calorie diet, if we have less than 10% calories from added sugars, how many grams of sugar is that gonna be? Added sugar, grams of added sugar. So we've got a 2,000 calorie diet, and if we're gonna have less than 10% in our diet, added to our diet, how many grams of sugar is that gonna be? Okay, so try doing the math on that. So just remember, 1 gram of sugar equals 4 calories. So we have 2,000 calorie diet, 1 gram of sugar is equal to 4 calories. How many grams of sugar can we have in our diet that's added sugar? So 10% of 2,000 is how much? Okay, it's 200 calories. So if we divide that by 4, 50. Okay, so added sugars, we should only have 50 grams at the very most in our diet based on a 2,000 calorie diet. Okay. Okay. So this is Snapple iced tea. So this is a single serving, and this is the whole bottle. So this is another thing on labeling. I'm sure you all know this. When you pick up and you say, oh, this whole bottle is only 70 calories. Sweet. But that's per serving. So now there's 3 servings. So now we're up to, you know, what does that make it, 4,000 calories? No, it makes it 110. Okay. So it's just, when you're reading the label, it's a little bit sneaky, okay? Because a lot of times that per serving, you think that's what the whole package is. It's not. So you have to look at that. So these are teaspoons of sugar. So this glass has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teaspoons of sugar. So if we have a teaspoon of sugar, which is equal to 4 calories, multiply that out, and that's how many calories we have for that right there. So this is how much is in that bottle. This is how much is in a Red Bull with a lot of caffeine. These are older slides actually, so I probably need to upgrade this like to Monster and stuff like that, but all right. And this is what we have for Coca-Cola. Okay, how much nutrients is in this, or this, or this, or this, or this? 0. There's no nutrients in this. So this is high caloric intake with no nutrients, okay? And I don't think our younger population drinks a lot of Coke or anything, so I don't think we have much to worry about. Sarcasm. Okay, so now we're going to get into the glycemic index and the glycemic load here a little bit. And I'm just going to, I talked about it just a second ago. So this is all in table 4.4 on page 135. We're going to go over. So you're going to hear this glycemic index, and it's a good way to talk to people about food, especially your diabetics, okay? So we talked about it's a ranking system. It's a ranking system to show how it affects glucose in the bloodstream, and it's based on the consumptions of 50 grams of carbohydrates, okay? So the glycemic index is based on 50 grams and how that food with 50 grams of it, or carbohydrates, affects the blood glucose level. So if you have 70 or more, you have high glucose index. If you have 69 to 55, you have medium, and 55 or less, you have low. So now we have something called the glycemic load. And there's the, and they just take the glycemic index times grams of non-fiber carbohydrate in one serving divided by 100. So what does all that mean? That means basically the glycemic load includes the portion size for the food. It's not based on just 50 grams, it's based on the portion size of the food. So it's a little bit more practical, okay? And there's your ranking there, 20 or more, 19 to 11, or 10 or less. So the glycemic load, again, I'll repeat myself here, is a little more functional when you're trying to set up programs for people, because then you can advise them on food based on portion sizes. So we're gonna go through digestion. What slide are we on? Ooh, we're doing good. I have to get to 30 today. So everyone turn to page 133. This is a random thing I'm going to throw out there. I like this book. Dr. Ulrich and I like it a lot. But if you have run into any other books that you think are just outstanding, please let me know, because we're looking at upgrading this book a little bit. So this slide basically goes 1 through 7, and this just goes through 1 through 7 that's on the page here. So when you start chewing, the saliva in your mouth starts to break down maltose in the mouth, and that goes down into your stomach, and then it's inactivated by the stomach acids. The pancreas then, breaks down the starch into maltose in the small intestines then enzymes within the wall of the small intestines break down the disaccharides, sucrose, lactose, and maltose into monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, and galactose. And then number 5, glucose, fructose, and galactose are then absorbed into the blood and taken to the liver by a portal vein, and some soluble fibers ferment into the various acid gases by the bacteria in the large intestines, and insoluble fiber escape, digest in, and excrete in feces. Okay, so that is just basically some of the breakdowns with some of the enzymes. And that was the whole purpose of that slide right there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about glucose in the bloodstream now. So normal is 80 to 100 milligrams per deciliter, okay? So has anyone worked with or know anybody that has diabetes and they poke their finger and then they get that number? So this is in reference to this. So they're analyzing to see how much glucose is in the bloodstream, okay? And I think the numbers for, let's see, my wife has to do this, so it's between 80 and 120. That's what they tell her normals are. So if you have something that has high glycemic index, that might lead to hyperglycemia. And hyperglycemia is basically an increase in blood sugars in the blood, or increased glucose in the blood. Okay. So then what should happen is that the insulin response should happen and then move blood glucose into the cells. So, but has anyone heard of the sugar high and then the sugar low? Yeah. So sometimes when you spike your glucose levels, the insulin reaction happens. And as long as it happens with a correct response, it should balance out the bloodstream glucose, but sometimes there could be an overreaction, which then drives down the glucose levels in the bloodstream. And then we have hypoglycemia. Has anyone ever heard of that before? Hypoglycemic, too low blood sugar in the blood. Okay. So, and we talked about the GLUT, the GLUT4 receptors are activated by insulin, and also exercise will activate the GLUT4 receptors too. So those are the two ways that those become active, and we're going to talk about them right now. So this is in your book, and it is on page 135. It may be a little easier to see on the book than it is on the slide. So if we look, this is what the cell membrane of the cell looks like when insulin hasn't been released by the pancreas, okay? This is what happens just, let's see, just kind of resting. So if we want to look at those GLUT4 receptors, they're located mostly on the inside of the cell, okay? And there's a few of them when they're on the outside. Actually, in this slide, it only shows one of them. But most of them are hanging out on the inside of the cell. And then if we go with insulin, so now we have an increased glucose level in the bloodstream, and then the pancreas releases insulin. What happens then is that those GLUTs then they migrate out to the cell membrane. And when they do that, then they allow for the glucose to then enter the cell. So then the glucose absorbs the cell absorbs the glucose and stores it as glycogen. Any questions on that? All right. So, does exercise benefit carbohydrate metabolism? So exercise may enhance glucose tolerance with insulin sensitivity. So exercise then affects those GLUT4 receptors and makes them more receptive to pulling glucose into the cell. So glucose uptake into the cell is elevated for 2 hours after an endurance exercise bout. So the exercise may increase the GLUT4 receptors in the cell membrane. Exercise can increase insulin sensitivity for about 16 hours afterwards. This is why exercise is pretty good. It's very good for diabetics. So diabetics need to stay active, as this helps with their insulin, balancing the insulin levels out in their bloodstream. So exercise believed to be an important role in the prevention of type 2 diabetes by regulation or decreasing blood glucose levels. So we have an epidemic of type 2 diabetes in this country right now. It's an epidemic, okay? Can we get rid of the epidemic of type 2 diabetes? Can we completely eliminate almost all of it? We could. So there's been so many studies about how changing your diet and lifestyle can completely eliminate type 2 diabetes, okay? So when you do talk to people, I mean, I have a patient right now that has had a frozen shoulder, and it was a insidious onset of frozen shoulder, which is a big red flag that there's a systemic problem going on, a systemic problem going on, okay? Because people just don't get frozen shoulders for no reason. They get them for a reason. And normally there's an injury, an accident, and then they don't move their shoulder, and then the capsule becomes adhered and it becomes frozen. But you just don't hear about many that all of a sudden out of the blue, they can't move their shoulder anymore. That's called a diabetic frozen shoulder, okay, from diabetes. She also came with knee surgery. Her knee is healing really slowly. Another problem from diabetes is poor circulation. So talk to her about her diet. I'm a physical therapist, so for me to dive into her diet and talk about her diet, some people would say, no, that's not in your realm, but it is, because this is all related. If I don't talk about it, then I'm really not doing my job. So, I mean, if I worked in a hospital system, could my boss come and say to me, hey, you're not a dietitian, I want you to talk to your patients like that? I mean, yeah, they could say that to me, but I feel like if I didn't say something, that I wouldn't be doing my job, so, okay? So see how it can be all related. So when you're working with your patients, I mean, it could be okay, or working with your clients, it's very appropriate to say, hey, what do you have for breakfast? What's your common thing you have for dinner? And talk about them like that. If they have type 2 diabetes, you could say, hey, why don't you watch this show called Forks Over Knives? Why don't you watch this show, What the Health? You can just tell them to watch these different shows that are out there too, which really point to different directions on how type 2 diabetes can be healed. Now, I mean, What the Health is a very controversial show, but it does prove a point. It does have a couple good points that it talks about. So, okay. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I say What the Health, the movie?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody knows that, okay. It is a controversial movie, and granted, it was sensationalized in a few parts, and but I still think the overall message was pretty powerful. So the fates of blood glucose. So it can be used for energy. It may be converted in the liver or muscle into glycogen. It may be converted and stored as fat in adipose tissue. Ooh, we don't want that. So then we've got glucogenesis, we've got glucogenolysis, we have glucoecogenesis. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit now. So glucogenesis is when you can, actually it's on the next slide, so we're going to move to that one. Actually, the next slide after that, we'll do that one. So what happens when blood glucose enters the body, it's either stored as glycogen in the muscle, or it's gone to the liver and stored as glycogen. Those are two main places that the body stores glycogen. It can also be just excreted out as urine. It can also then go to adipose tissue, or it could be used as energy. So those are the main aspects of glucose, and when it hits the bloodstream, what's going to happen to it. So these are where the carbohydrate storages we talked about, if it gets sent to the liver, if it gets sent to the blood or the muscles, These are the amount of grams that can be stored in the liver, in the muscle, and in the blood. And then also it gives the equivalent amount of calories too. So hormones and glucose metabolism. So insulin is designed to decrease blood glucose levels. So again, the insulin activates the GLUT4 receptors, which allow then the glucose to enter the cell. Glucagon, which is then produced by the pancreas, helps to increase blood glucose levels. So when you start to go hypoglycemic, then glucagon is then produced, and then what it does is it tries to elevate the glucose in your body. Epinephrine tries to increase blood glucose levels by promoting glycogen breakdown and glucose release from the liver. And cortisol stimulates glucogenesis in the liver. So that's how the hormones affect it. So glucogenesis is made from protein and fat. And catch up here. So this is so from protein metabolism, glucose and alanine cycle can produce glycogen, or can produce glucose. So then when we have, let's just get to the next slide because it's easier. So the fat cells, when they break down, so when the blood sugars run low, the body then goes into this gluconeogenesis. So what happens is the fat cells break down, and glycerol is released from the fat cell. And then the muscles release a bunch of things. Alanine, pyruvate, lactate, and they all go into the bloodstream, and then they all travel to the liver, and then the liver then produces glucose. So that's glucose neogenesis. So that's when we start to go into starvation mode. And this is kind of what feeds off of, well, we'll get into ketosis when we get into fats. But this is basically what the beginning stages of what happens when you go into ketosis and when you go onto like the ketogenic diet. This is the very initial stages. And this is a great example of how carbohydrates are the best source for energy, and why the body is built for that. I mean, it's just a direct line from carbohydrates right down to Krebs cycle, right down to energy. But protein and fats can also help produce carbohydrates, and they can enter into the Krebs cycle to produce energy. So it just shows how amino acids and glucose and glycerol fatty acids, they all work together, and they all work to produce energy. It's a pretty good flow slide, I think. It's good. Okay. And I think what we're going to do now, let's see. We're going to move now into energy and how carbohydrates produce energy. But I think what we're going to do is we're actually going to break off right now. And lecture is going to end for today. So we will continue the lecture next Friday on energy and carbohydrates and energy. So make sure that if you haven't picked up your worksheets from last time, pick them up. If you handed in your worksheets for today, make sure you have them back. If you don't have them back for me, that means I haven't checked you off. So Anna, I need you to come up.
Hey, Karen. Can I hit your eye?
There you are.
All of first
And
semester,
Jim, I have yours too, so make sure you pick yours up.
because I nanny, like, would pick the boys up from daycare. And so whenever people were in my backseat, they'd just sit in the backseat. Like, yeah. Right.
Oh, I said. Okay. Should just held on to it. you've got the strike here from the hammer, okay? What it's gonna do is it's gonna activate the sensory neurons here, which is gonna then travel through the afferent. Okay, so the afferent's gonna travel back to spinal cord, okay? There's gonna be, it's gonna come through posterior horn, and then it's gonna synapse over, and that synapse is gonna send it through the efferent system. It's gonna send a signal back to the quadriceps, and it's gonna hit the sensor, it's gonna hit the motor neuron here, and it's gonna tell it to contract. So this one's gonna be contract, contract. And then this, there's also another signal that's gonna be sent down to the hamstring down here. It's gonna, to relax. Okay, so it's gonna be relaxed. So you need to, so what you need to be able to label, you need to be able to label the sensory motor neuron, the receptors here. You need to be able to label the afferent systems travel back here. You need to talk about the synapse here in the spinal cord. Then you need to say that the afferent response back to the motor neuron, motor unit, and what it does, it contracts or relaxes. So, yeah. Yep, that's it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So would you ever tell somebody to do an Atkins diet to a point?